Hello and welcome to the Mostly Professional podcast. I'm your host, Matthew James French, and we're here to talk about the period between beginner and master of craft and career from people just like you. Now today, we're doing a special little mini-sode. This one, coincidentally, is not about people just like you. This episode is about, in the last 5 years, people, groups, ideas that I've drawn heavily on, and one thing I've learned or applied from them. So we'll jump right in, and if any of these people have podcasts or places to find them, I'll pepper that in throughout. So one of the first, a duo that I really started learning from, it was when I was just before I was 20, really starting to think of myself as an adult, really. I came across this duo called the Minimalists and the concept of minimalism. And they had a podcast that I started listening to and really enjoyed. They've got a couple of books as well that I've read. Minimalism, Live a Meaningful Life, is probably the place that I would recommend you start. I'll link all these in the description below as well. And one thing that I really learned and applied from those two, Josh Fields-Milburn and Ryan Nicodemus are the two guys that are the Minimalists and their team. One thing that they mention a few times that I think is a really valuable question to ask yourself frequently, honestly, is how can I live better with less? And what I've done with that is attempted to pare down on physical possessions, first and foremost, especially now that I'm living on my own. All of the space is my space, and therefore I have the responsibility to look after it or fill it or not fill it. So everything is in my control, so I have to keep that in mind. And I find myself getting a bit flustered with clutter, as well as the fact that my parents, apologies if you're watching this, mum and dad, they have a lot of stuff, and it makes me a little agitated to think of living in a space with lots and lots of stuff. So finding the beauty in empty space and negative space feels clean, feels clear. And I think that it's a bit of a sign of maturity to be able to know what you actually need and not be willy-nilly in your spending. And it's a really good way to not blow the budget, which I had to learn the hard way more than once, of going, I'll just get this thing, but not having heaps of income. And then, maybe I didn't need that, but I really could have used that money for some groceries, or some more groceries. I'm not starving to death. Or could have gone to that film I wanted to go to. So it's a good way to reprioritize your money as well. But on top of that, it doesn't just mean physical possessions. It can mean what you can do with your time, for example. And I have not necessarily been one of these people, but I know a lot of people that are yes people, that if you ask them to do something, they'll help. Now, I don't think that helping people is a bad thing. I think it's amazing. I think it's really commendable. But saying yes so much that you run yourself out in the long term is not a great strategy, in my opinion, and from what I've observed of people and of myself when I've done it. And I really commend people that work really, really hard. And this is not about that. This is about knowing that every time you say yes, you're saying no to something else. And every time you say no, you are saying yes to something else. So you don't have an obligation to do everything that someone asks of you. And if someone is asking you, that's a request, and you say no, and there's a reason for that, and they get very agitated about that, then was it a request, or was it something that they were expecting you to do? In which case, it wasn't really a request, it was a bit of a trap, which is, I think, is a way that you can learn things about other people and what they expect of you. So that's living better with less physical stuff, with a cleaner, clearer schedule, and even though I'm going to contradict myself a little bit later on in this segment, with the idea that you have to do everything and be everything and go everywhere and chase everything and have everything. One, you can't. The whole FOMO thing, fear of missing out, you're going to miss out on 99% of the things that exist and the things to do, and that's not a bad thing, but being aware of that can take a lot off your mind so that you feel like you're making more meaningful, powerful choices. So the Minimalists, their podcast is great. They have a few books. I'll link those below, and check them out. I met them at their Brisbane show, because they tour as well. I met them at their Brisbane show, and they're absolute sweethearts. So if you ever do see them on tour, or if you ever get a chance to see them on tour, I'd highly recommend it. They are very, very lovely people. Number 2, which will come as no surprise from the subject matter of not only this mini-sode, but the whole idea behind this podcast, is Tim Ferriss. Tim Ferriss. Now, it's not necessarily him specifically, but what his podcast opened up to me was that really, really changed my life, and opened me up to this whole world of people and knowledge and wisdom and skills and trying new things. Besides the thing that I'll mention, I think that I've attempted new things more so from him and his guests than any other place or suggestion or anything like that. It's through him as a filter and an excellent interviewer that I've wanted to try various things, quite frankly, including this podcast and this video and everything as well. So who Tim Ferriss is, basically, I'm not sure how he would explain himself, but from what I've seen is that he is an investor, he is an interviewer, and he is an experimenter. And what I mean by experimenter is through his books and podcast. So the first book that really he did and that really got him big was called The 4-Hour Workweek, and that was a book written in the mid 2000s, I think, that was about the gig economy and kind of about being an entrepreneur. And it wasn't necessarily like, the 24/7 hustle kind of entrepreneurs. It was more like really, really smart decision making, autonomy, and choosing how you need to work to live the kind of life that you want to live. So it was kind of about lifestyle design as well. He really pioneered that term as well. So 4-Hour Workweek was where he got started. But when he started his podcast, which was interviewing world-class people in various fields, business people, creatives, some spiritual folks, he definitely was exploring the world of experimentation with these people that had different paths to success in different fields, some with very different beliefs than him, and some that have done or do consistently things that he hadn't tried. Things like meditation, breathing exercises, visualization, certain business practices, note-taking methods, lots of practical, pragmatic things. He's a bit like me. He's a INTJ, if you know your Myers-Briggs personality code. And I'm an INTJ as well. So he's very interested in details and nitty-gritty and practical things, which I found really, really exciting, because they weren't all concepts. A lot of them were things you could do, or you could research, or you could experiment with. The Tim Ferriss podcast was definitely where I came across the idea of meditation as something that wasn't necessarily woo-woo and spiritual, and you had to be a Buddhist to do it. And I try and meditate every day, at least a few times a week, usually in the morning for about 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes on average. And I do feel better when I do it, and I wouldn't have come across that without the Tim Ferriss podcast. Now, I didn't just do it without knowing anything about it. I listened to some of the guests that were more knowledgeable about it. I also did a bit of research, but I think that's a topic for a different episode. So I learnt that through him and his guests. So that's a specific example. And from there, he wrote a few more books, including Tools of Titans, Tribe of Mentors, 4-Hour Body, and 4-Hour Chef. And all of those are more similar to each other than 4-Hour Workweek. They are, again, broadly speaking, more so experiments and practical takeaways of various methods. 4-Hour Body is more about health, strength, fitness, sex, mental health. 4-Hour Chef is about meta learning and cooking to an extent. And Tools of Titans and Tribe of Mentors are a little bit more shorter, sharper takeaways from successful folks that he's interviewed. So him. So what have I taken away from Tim Ferriss more than anything is that, and he didn't come up with this, but he does mention it lots, and I heard it first through him, is you are the 5 people you surround yourself with. Now that doesn't necessarily mean the 5 people that are physically around you the whole time. For me, honestly, those 5 people are probably podcasters, including Ferriss, that are constantly in my ears, and I'm constantly listening to and learning from, and it's as if they're a friend of mine. I wish I had somewhere to return the favor, but I don't yet. So having that presence, that mindset around you. So let's say the 5 people around you are your friends, and you have 5 friends, and they're all in different ways, go-getters and people trying to succeed, trying to help each other and help you, and you're trying to help them. There's a network there that's going in a direction, versus, let's say, you're hanging with people that you were friends with in high school, and you got along while you're in high school, but now you have different goals and ambitions, or lack thereof, and you feel like you're spending time with each other as an obligation or as a nostalgic, remember when this, and especially as a 20-something-year-old, that can be really hard to decide to break up with your friends. But I've had to do that sometimes, or gradually drift from friends and relations where that happens, and it's really hard at the time, but you know that it's for yourself ultimately. And let's say you have an ideal, you have an idol in some way, and if you want to be like them because there's something about them that you admire or you want for yourself, of course you surround yourself with them in the ways that you can. Let's say they have a podcast, you listen to it all the time. Let's say they make videos, you watch them. For me, as a performer, if they're an actor, you might watch their films a lot, and not just because you enjoy them, but because you're trying to learn something from them, listening to interviews, having pictures of them up to remind you or inspire you in some way. But if they are your friends or family or something like that, it's spending quality time with them and trying to enrich each other's lives. So you are the 5 people you surround yourself with, because you're the same thing for someone else. And you want to be able to provide the best inner relationship that you can as well. So number 3, on a bit less of a touchy-feely subject, is one of my favorite baldies. Tim Ferriss is one of my favorite baldies, but this guy's top 3 favorite baldies is Jocko Willink, Mr. Get After It. And he came onto the scene real big in the last few years. People have really been enjoying what he has to say. Now, he has an excellent podcast, which is anything from absolutely brutal depictions of combat and book reviews of soldiers and veterans, and talking about fitness, discipline, business, leadership. Now, Jocko says this all the time. It's the title of one of his books, and it is the thing that I have drawn from him, which is discipline equals freedom. Now, I know that sounds like something that should have been in 1984. It sounds a little weirdly propagandistic, I suppose, but here's what I think that it means. Let's say you have a goal of something that you want to achieve, and it probably takes discipline to get there. So you want the freedom to achieve that goal. And how can you get there? Is through discipline. So let's say, here's a really black and white example. Let's say you weightlift and you weigh 70 kilos and you're healthy enough, and you can currently deadlift, 120 kilos, and you want to get to 150. Okay, so there's some statistical goals there. Now, are you going to get there by willy-nilly trying it every now and then, putting it off till later? No, you're going to get there through discipline and training and hard work and sacrifice and focus, and it will lead you to that goal. Now, the other side of that discipline equals freedom is, if you have a bit of a monkey mind, a very floaty attention span, and there are things that you want to do, and you think, well, I could do that or I could do that, and they may or may not be towards your end goal or goals, having the discipline of going, well, I get up at this time and I eat my breakfast and then I train and then I learn this thing and I practice this skill, is that it actually frees you from all the extraneous floaty thoughts that pull you away from the thing that you actually want to do. Because there's an element that you do have control over your mind, and there's an element that you don't. And routine and habit and discipline really do help with those things. So I feel better emotionally and everything when I'm more disciplined, because it's like I'm outside of myself, like a parent to a child going, no, we got to do this. And that actually makes me feel better because I know that that's actually leading to the goal that I want. It's a very roundabout explanation of that, and Jocko explains it a lot better on his podcast in various ways. And I would highly recommend it. He has a few books. 2 of them are on leadership, a bit more to do with business and management, but they're from his time as a SEAL. One is called Extreme Ownership, which is basically about responsibility. You want to take the most responsibility possible, take extreme ownership of it. Everything is your fault, in the good and the bad. And then there's Dichotomy of Leadership, which is his second book that's more to do with extreme ownership. And then he has another book called Discipline Equals Freedom, Field Training Manual, I think is the subtitle. That's more about his psychology, his beliefs, and training. And he has a few kids' books, actually. Way of the Warrior Kid. Now, I wish I'd read those when I was a child, but they weren't around. And if I'm ever a dad someday, probably will give them to my boys. And girls. This ain't a This ain't a gender game. Everybody should be strong. There's no downside to being strong. Speaking of strong, little sub person that just came to mind. A guy named Mark Rippetoe, who is basically, I might get this wrong, who we would think of when we think of starting strength, which is a book. Well, there's a few books by him, but I guess it's a weightlifting system to an extent, a training system. And Mark Rippetoe, I think, is the head of that, chief guy. Anyone who lifts is going to persecute me for not getting this right. That's fine. And there's three things I think of when I think of Mark Rippetoe: his power gut, him in his Texan accent going hip drive, just to do with squatting and how you squat properly using your hips, your hip drive, and his books. But he has a saying, and I'm trying to remember it properly now. He has a saying, and it is on the wall of his gyms, which is, I think it's something like, being strong makes you harder to kill, or something like that. I'm gonna Google it right now. I apologize for this brief gap. Jamie, can you pull that up? Okay, I found it. The phrase is, strong people are generally more useful and harder to kill. Okay, I got it wrong. I'm going to do it word for word now. Strong people are harder to kill than weak people and more useful in general. Mark Rippetoe. Hip drive. I love it. So, as you can see, there's a bit of a trend of physical strength going on here, and that's been something that's popped up in the last few years, because in 2015 I had a bit of an eating disorder, was starving myself, and in the last 2 years I've been really trying to I've regained my size, but my normal size, but I've been really trying to get strong, and it is really fun and really goddamn hard. So I would suggest to anybody that if you don't do some kind of strength training, to try it. It teaches you a lot. Teaches you your physical limits and how much further away they actually are than you think they are. Teaches you humility. Teaches you discipline. You get healthier. You get stronger. You typically look a little better, in my opinion. I think that people that are in shape look really damn good. And that's what I want for me. But I also want the feeling of squatting some heavy ass weight. It feels I don't know how to explain it to someone that hasn't done it before. It is a feeling that you have to try in your body for yourself. In the words of Ronnie Coleman, everybody want to be a bodybuilder, but ain't nobody want to lift no heavy ass weight. I'll do it though. Look up Ronnie Coleman. He's training inspiration. He's this ginormous African American bodybuilder, multiple time bodybuilding champion, and he's always smiling and laughing when he trains, and just shouting these silly phrases. He'll pick up the dumbbells that weigh 150 pounds and just scream lightweight baby, and just he's really cool. Going on a bit of a tangent now. Maybe I'll make a whole episode about physical strength. Now, speaking of another fit guy, but this isn't his whole shtick, is Casey Neistat. Now, if you ever watch YouTube, you probably are familiar with Casey Neistat. His vlogs basically are like king vlogs. If you vlog, if you've seen vlogs or you vlog, you've either seen Casey's vlogs, seen someone imitate Casey's vlogs, or you've imitated Casey's vlogs, or you've accidentally imitated them, or you've actively tried to not imitate them, because they're just so good. Now, he does a lot of things that I admire. He runs pretty much every day. He works really goddamn hard. He's a good family man. He's a great father. He's really positive, and he makes damn good videos and films. Now, he has a tattoo on his arm, I think it's his left arm. It just looks like it's scrawled on there. It looks like someone drew it on with permanent marker, like you do with people in marathons. Looks like a big number. But it says, do more. Do more. It's just that simple. Now, this contradicts with my note about the minimalists, but at the same time, I think everyone knows what they need to do less of and what they need to do more of. So when I think of just that simple 2-word phrase, I know what I need to do more of. Is it work? Probably. Is it training? Absolutely. Is it something that I don't think that I can do or do enough of? And ultimately, I know that at the end of the day, like the end of an actual physical day, and probably when I'm on my deathbed, I will feel better about the things that I did as opposed to didn't do, in the broad scheme of the word. So do more. It's some ASMR. Do more. Do more. Do more. Do more. Feels great to say. Now, whatever you think about him, most people are interested in him in some regard, and he's been only in the last few months really someone that I've been absolutely fascinated with. I've binge listened to his podcasts and interviews and Joe Rogan with him. Jordan B Peterson. Now, there's a lot of things that I've learned from him or admire about him, and a lot of things that I disagree with. But something that has been missing from what I've been taught in my life, heard around me, is a more cohesive and more useful way of saying that you're not perfect. And what I mean by that is what Peterson goes on about, which is sort yourself out before changing the world. Changing the world is great and admirable most of the time, and I am doing that myself in certain ways and see that in other people. But I know that it's hollow when I am actively not trying to improve myself and sort myself out so that I can be a more productive member of that action. So there's a bit of a joke, there's a bit of a meme, bit of a dank meme about Peterson and cleaning your room. Clean your room. He says, clean your room. Clean your room. What does that mean? What does clean your room mean? Well, it's literal and it's metaphorical. Do you feel better when you have a clean room? Absolutely. I know almost anybody does. Not, and I'm in my bedroom now. Now I'm paranoid that it's messy and and gross, and it will be very ironic for this segment of the video. Clean your room means, well, clean your room so that it's orderly and it makes sense and it functions for what you need. So that it makes sense for what you need. And cleaning your space is an external representation of you. If you're a organized person, and I don't mean overly, you don't have to be anal about it. But if you're organized in your space, you're probably organized in your life in some regard. And that way, when you've fixed your own problems first, that you have the most control over, that you have control over first, it will be more beneficial for you when you are trying to take on problems outside of yourself, in your family, in your home, in your society. And I know a lot of people who are absolute social activists, and some of them are more on the side of got to fix everyone else first, and some that are more on the side of I'm fixing me too, or fixing me first. And in my opinion, that is a better place to start. So the thing that I have taken from Peterson, besides other things, I stopped being as much of an edgy atheist of like, religion's dumb. I don't believe in it. I'm not about to start going to church. However, the Bible, as a book of stories, is pretty interesting, And beforehand, I think I was being a bit too arrogant about what I thought I knew about things, and also what I thought it was. If you look at it as a pretty full-on book of stories of failures and wisdom and metaphors and things, even if you don't believe in it literally, I think there's a lot more in there than the edgy atheists will take away from it. But, still not going to go to church. Sorry, everybody. I know you were really looking forward to that. Okay, so in summary, these are some of the people or groups or anything like that I've learned a lot from in the last 5 years. It might even be 3 years, but it's a bit hard to tell, so I'm going to say 5. The Minimalists. How can I live better with less? Tim Ferriss. You are the 5 people you surround yourself with. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean physically. Jocko Willink. Discipline equals freedom. Casey Neistat. Do more. Mark Rippetoe. Strong people are harder to kill than weak people, and in general, more useful. And Jordan B Peterson. Sort yourself out and clean your room. Thanks, Dad. Thanks to all my dads that I've listed here, and my real dad and my real mum. These are all my dads. I have a lot of dads. Now, you might be saying to yourself, Matthew, there aren't any women here. Well, that's true in this list, and maybe I will make a different list about women that I have learned from. There is no shortage of inspirational, wise, pragmatic, powerful, physically strong women to watch and learn from. This list, however, is just the first people that came to mind. And for some of them, the ones that are more, let's say, physical training orientated, that's a biological thing. I am probably going to look at men more so. One, because they have the same body as me to an extent, and they might have the same goals that I have to an extent. But besides that, everybody can learn from pretty much everybody. And on that note, I hope I showed you something you may not have thought of before, told you about a person you may not have heard of, and maybe do a little bit of research after this, a little bit of Googling. How good is Google nowadays? I was listening to Tim Ferriss podcast the other day, and he was interviewing an 80-year-old man. It's a very reductionistic way to put him, but he was 80. He's 80. And he was talking about how he's so happy that Google exists now because he's 80. So for most of his life, the internet has not even been a thing. And even for some of his life, it was the shit internet, So take advantage of the tools at your disposal. Now, I've talked for too long. Thank you for listening. All the links to these people, any of their podcasts, books, YouTube channels, anything like that, I will put in the description of this YouTube video, of this podcast, or in the show notes if this ends up on a different platform. I'll put some links where links can be put. Thank you very much for listening. Have a great day. And leave in the comments of these folks, which was your favorite takeaway, or if you haven't heard of any of these people and you want to go look them up, let me know. I'm very curious to see and hear what you thought of this, and what you thought of this mini-sode, which is not very mini. It's very long. Thank you again. It's probably about the fourth time I've said it. I'm Matthew James French. This is the Mostly Professional Podcast. Thank you, and see you in the next one.